All right, couple people still joining us, but I think we can get started now. Again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us for today's People's Hearing for a True Net Zero Code. This hearing is going to act like a regular hearing would at the State House. We're going to have people speak for 3 to 5 minutes. And we're going to record everything that happens here. We're already recording. If you don't want to be recorded, feel free to turn off your camera, but we will record everything that happens and we will send it on to excuse me, the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee, as well as to the administration. A couple of notes. There's going to be time for people to speak who are not featured speakers. That will be at the end, and we also can't promise that we're going to get to everyone. And so if you want to make sure that you get a comment in there and you want it to be included, you can send those comments to Miranda from MCAN. And if Miranda, you could just drop your email into the chat, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. In terms of our agenda today, there is going to be a brief presentation from MCAN explaining why we're here, why this is important. Then we're going to hear from a number of city officials, technical experts, health experts, leaders from the community on why equitable building decarbonization and a true net zero stretch code is critical to lowering our utility bills, improving the health of our communities, increasing our resiliency, and of course, helping us to meet our emissions targets. After that, we'll open it up to others who would like to speak. Like I said, we are going to try to keep it within a certain time frame, and so we won't be able to get to everyone. And so if you don't have a chance to comment, but you'd like to, send your comment on over to Miranda. And so, apart from speaking here today, of course, we can all exercise our voices outside of this Zoom meeting, telling decision makers that this is an important issue to us. And to do that, we have a social media toolkit that if someone could drop that in the chat, that would be awesome. And so we encourage you as you are listening to make your voice heard, making sure the administration and the TUE committee understands that this is a priority. Please look through the toolkit now. Feel free to post as the hearing is taking place. We'll also have a section where I think we'll pause and remind everyone to post, but you can continue to post in that toolkit throughout the day. All right, I think that's about all. I'm going to hand it on over to Logan from MCAN. Thank you, Logan.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our partners for helping to make this happen. I am so excited to be with you all in this fight for equitable building decarbonization and a true net zero stretch code. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Logan Malik, and I am the interim executive director at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And as just mentioned, before we get going and we start to really hear from the people that we're here to listen, to, which is you all, and which is folks in the community and advocates, experts who are doing the important work around equitable building decarbonization, I want to just talk a little bit about why we're here, why this matters, and why it should be a priority for the next administration as we move forward. And so in order to do that, I also want to provide some context and make sure that everyone is on the same page. And I'll start by just briefly going over what are building codes and how do they affect you in your daily life. So a building code is a set of regulations that govern the design, the construction, and the modification of buildings across our communities. And so it's commercial, residential, multi-use, it's everything. And every 3 years, the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, or Mass DOER, is in charge of updating these codes that regulate how new buildings should be built. As part, and I will just say, we just went through the regulation process, and DOER on September 25th released their finalized language for the proposed codes and for the updates that they would like to see. Now, within those updates, there were 3 specific codes that they proposed and that are included in our regulations. The first is the base code, and this is essentially the floor, the bare minimum that every single community, regardless of what one community may or may not want, at a bare minimum, you have to meet the requirements in the base code. You then have this elevated and improved stretch code, which is called the stretch code. Now, this is an opt-in code, and that means that municipalities get to decide whether or not they want to be a part of it. But we have seen a number of municipalities opt into this code, and as a result, there are several improvements and increased standards that they have to meet to increase energy efficiency, reduce emissions, etc. Now, what we're really here to discuss, and the most exciting piece of these building codes, we think, is this third code, and that is something that we'll refer to as the specialized opt-in stretch code. This code was mandated by the legislature as part of the 2021 Next Generation Climate Roadmap Bill. And it was mandated because the legislature saw a need, if we were to meet our emissions targets in the building sector, to have a stronger tool in the toolbox of municipalities to really actually set standards that move us closer, that are net zero. They established in that language a net zero specialized opt-in stretch code. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Now, why is this important? Why does this matter? You might have already gotten a sense of why this matters and why building codes are important. But the fact of the matter is that building codes are a critical tool for energy justice and our efforts around that, for climate justice, and for our efforts to mitigate the climate crisis. If we adopt progressive and aggressive building codes, we're going to be able to realize a whole bunch of benefits as we meet our emissions targets. We're going to increase resiliency in our community, increase equity, lower the cost of utility bills, create new jobs, and critically meet our emissions targets. In other words, through adopting strong and progressive building codes, we will be able to transform our buildings from polluters to protectors of our climate, of our communities, of our residents. Now, that is why this matters, and that's why we continue to see the need to advocate in this space. And so acknowledging that the ideal and really what we're working towards is net zero, is moving towards a net zero future, we see the specialized stretch code as the critical piece that communities, again, will be able to opt into to transition to a net zero future. And this is for new construction. I want to emphasize that this is for new construction. So we're trying not to dig a hole deeper than what we already have. But let's talk a little bit about what is in the current specialized stretch code that was proposed by DOER. Once a community opts in, they will be required to meet a number of standards, as I mentioned, and they'll be able to do it through 3 pathways. The first is a zero energy pathway. The second is an all electric pathway. And the third is a mixed fuel pathway. The zero energy pathway and the all electric pathways are exactly, I would say maybe not exactly, but very close to what we want to see and what we envision as being truly net zero. Through increasing requirements around energy efficiency, while also requiring that new buildings are all electric, they will help us to ensure that utility rates are low by actually reducing the energy that is going to be used, by increasing community resilience through creating buildings that are more resistant and can weatherize extreme heat and extreme cold, which we're more likely to see now as a result of the climate crisis. We're going to see a reduction in emissions. Critically, we're also going to see the creation of many new jobs in building operations. We're going to need tons of new electricians to do the work of electrifying our buildings. We're going to need HERS raters. The list goes on. This is an opportunity to create new, good paying jobs. And so if the code, the specialized stretch code had just these two pathways, it would be a truly net zero code and one that we would be incredibly excited to see. Unfortunately, the code and the way that it's proposed has a third pathway, and that is the mixed fuel pathway. And that allows for new buildings to choose to connect to fossil fuels and to continue to perpetuate our reliance on natural gas and oil. Now, it's important to mention there are incentives and there are pressures and various different components of the regulations that would make this less desirable and that would ensure that the transition to electrification, once that down the road, is doable. And we thank the DOER for their work on that. But still, in the best tool that we have in our toolbox, the most ambitious, we are still allowing for fossil fuels, for new fossil fuels over the next 3-4 years. And that's a real concern. Now, I want to be very clear that does not mean that communities should not opt into this specialized stretch code. It is very clear to us that even with this mixed fuel pathway, there will be clear benefits that will be realized by any community that opts into the specialized stretch code as it is written. And MCAN, and I know many of the advocacy organizations on this call will be pushing hard to make sure that communities understand the benefits of opting into this code. So I'm not proposing, and I don't think anyone is proposing, that we don't move forward as quickly as we can with the specialized stretch code, however it is proposed. But rather, what we're talking about and what we're really saying is that from a systematic statewide perspective, we can and we must do better. We see that this new administration that prioritizes this work, the legislature, which has been leading in this area, can continue to do more to reduce emissions in new construction and can continue to do more to advance equitable building decarbonization across the Commonwealth. And we need equitable building decarbonization now. That is very clear. As many of you know on this call, buildings make up or account for the second largest source of emissions in the Commonwealth. And that comes from nearly 2 million, I'd say over 2 million existing buildings. That means that we have a huge challenge on our hands, and we need to work to retrofit through deep decarbonization retrofits these existing buildings. We need equitable building decarbonization that also ensures that is done in a way that prioritizes communities that have historically been left out and communities and various different people that could benefit the most from this work, from the resiliency from the reduction in cost, et cetera. And so that means that in our equitable building decarbonization, we are prioritizing affordable housing. We're prioritizing environmental justice communities. We're prioritizing schools. We're prioritizing BIPOC and women-owned businesses. So we need to make an investment, and we need to make an investment now in retrofitting those existing buildings. While we're doing that, we cannot be digging our hole even deeper than it already is. We cannot be going in the opposite direction as we construct our new buildings. In other words, we cannot wait another 3 years for a true net zero stretch code. And so we see this as a wonderful opportunity for action. We have made progress. We have been moving forward in this work, but we need to continue to move forward. We need a down payment for deep decarbonization retrofits like what is proposed by the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund Coalition. And we also need Governor-elect Healy and the legislature to continue to prioritize equitable building decarbonization and amending the specialized stretch code to remove the fossil fuel pathway. And so that's why we're here today. We're here to listen to experts, to advocates about why this matters to them, why this is important, and why we need to, going into this new legislative session and into this new administration, be sure that we are prioritizing this work. So with that, I just want to say thank you again so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who is committed, who is going to be speaking today. And I do want to move forward with that speaking. And so I believe the first person on the docket who is going to be weighing in is Larry Cretion, the Executive Director from the Green Energy Consumers Alliance. Thank you so much, Larry, and take it away.
Hey, Logan, thank you very much. This is a great event. I appreciate the fact that your organization and others are sponsoring this. Our organization comes at this issue and many others about energy from the perspective of how are we going to achieve zero emissions by 2050, and realizing that every sector of the economy has to do its part. So we look at each big sector. We look at how we could do that. With electricity, it's pretty easy these days to see how we can do it by replacing fossil fuel power plants with wind and solar. And we know that it won't take 30 years to have zero emission electricity. The state of Rhode Island passed a law this year that said by 2033, 100% of its electricity will come from renewable energy. So we look at transportation, and we can envision a future not far away where we'll have electric vehicles, better walking and biking, and better public transportation, all replacing internal combustion engines well before 2050. But with buildings, we've got a different challenge. Common sense tells us that if we build a building today, it's going to last for far more than 30 years, far longer than it takes to build a wind turbine or an electric vehicle. And that's simply why every new building or major renovation project built today has to be heated by electricity, or it'll be that much more difficult to reach zero carbon. I recently looked at how much gas the state's gas utilities are saving through the Mass Save program. The numbers are not pretty. Annually, they're saving a bit more than 1% of the gas that they sell. Even if the gas companies don't add new customers, at that rate, we would be burning gas well past 2050. And that's not the state's mandate. That's not what we want. So let me put it another way. A new building in 2023 heated by fossil fuels is going to make it harder on the rest of us. To compensate for that additional fossil fuel, someone somewhere is going to have to spend more time and more effort in any sector of the economy. And that's a real equity issue. It's not just kicking the can down the road, as some might say. It's someone kicking the can down the road and asking the rest of us to go fetch it. And that's not fair. Compensating for additional fossil fuel can end up costing more per ton of avoided carbon than dealing with it in the first place. especially now that we have the Inflation Reduction Act to take advantage of at the federal level. The more exemptions we allow as we try to reach our climate mandates, the harder it's going to be on everyone else who doesn't get such an exemption. Let's stop for a moment and think about that office building constructed in 2023, 4, or 5, burning gas in 2050, a date by which all of our electricity and cars will have to be zero emission. So why do we exempt that office building? When you think of it in these terms, it becomes clear that communities should have the right to go to an all-electric stretch code. Now, finally, because I have a 10 o'clock staff meeting to go to, I asked if I could speak early, and I appreciate that. And I was going to repeat that old adage that you already did, Logan, which is when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Larry. We really appreciate your participation. I want to introduce our next speaker, which is Representative Steve Owens from Cambridge and Watertown. Steve?
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the coalition for putting this event together. As Logan said, my name's Steve Owens. I represent most of Watertown and parts of West and North Cambridge. I don't want to take up too much time because I know there's a long program, but I do want to make the point that has been made already. A specialized stretch code that fails to require electrification really can't be a true net zero stretch code and really only delays our ability to meet our 2050 climate goals. Every building that is heated by burning fossil fuels on site is a building that will eventually have to be retrofitted if we want to meet those goals. We already know we have a huge inventory. Logan said, what, 2 million buildings, homes and commercial buildings that are going to need significant upgrades to become more energy efficient and fossil fuel free. And allowing fossil fuels in new buildings, it just creates another generation of existing structures that'll soon need to have these retrofits with electrified heating at significantly greater expense, burdening our workforce and our taxpayers. And, from my perspective, municipalities are ready now for aggressive, truly net zero specialized stretch code. We've been talking about this since the first climate roadmap bill, now passed nearly 2 years ago. And we need to make sure that municipalities can adopt this specialized stretch code, on its own timetable, on their own timetables. Both of the communities that I represent are already making investments in net zero municipal buildings, and I think we're going to hear from Cambridge City Councilor Zondervan later in the program. But in Watertown, we've already finished 2 brand new net zero energy elementary schools. We're retrofitting a third, and we have a new net zero high school on the way. And we're not alone in this. Other communities are following suit. Taxpayers are making these commitments right now with the buildings we're constructing right now. And there's really just no time to wait for the private sector to catch up. And I understand that there are concerns about the delta, about the extra expenses involved in fossil fuel free construction, particularly in this environment of rising prices and supply chain complications. And but that price premium is really dropping. And one way to accelerate getting to price parity is really just to incentivize the creation of a workforce that can actually do the work. As we require more fossil fuel free construction, more firms will develop that expertise in their portfolio that increases competition, that brings down costs. And furthermore, we're really seeing right now the costs of inaction. We've known for decades that the price of oil and natural gas are really dependent on geopolitical forces that we have, little to no control over here in the Commonwealth. And this volatility wreaks havoc on household and municipal budgets. And meanwhile, the higher tides, the storm surges, the heat waves, the other weather events that used to be rare are causing untold millions of dollars in damages and putting us all on the hook for resiliency, for mitigation. All these measures are costing us money. So while certainly the Commonwealth can't reverse climate change on our own, we do have a moral and fiscal obligation to do just as much as we can to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We should be leading by example and really showing the world the way forward in net zero fossil fuel free construction of homes and commercial buildings of all sizes. The specialized stretch code can help drive that innovation, can make Massachusetts the center for developing the technologies and the workforce the whole world will need as we transition to clean energy. So I really thank everybody for their time today. I know we've got a long program, so that is all I will say, and I will turn it back over to Logan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative. We really appreciate you being here and for your comments. And as you mentioned, I do want to turn it over to our next speaker, Councillor Quentin Zondervan of the Cambridge City Council. So Quentin, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks so much, Logan. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for being here. So I'm coming to you right now from a net zero house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We did disconnect our gas last summer, and it took me 15 years to get to net zero in this house. And over that time, we reduced our total energy consumption by 50%, our grid energy consumption by 30%, and we're running about 70% on the solar panels on the roof. And I say all that to make it clear that this transition that we are looking for is already happening. It's already possible. We have all the technology, the economics work. There's simply no excuse not to do this. In Cambridge, we're already building some of the most environmentally friendly, affordable housing in the world. We're building passive house, net zero buildings that are 100% affordable housing for low-income residents. So again, there's no cost issue here. There's no concern that we wouldn't be able to build housing for people if we required them to be net zero. And even the commercial sector, the biolabs, I can look out my window and I see the construction of Alexandria's new 350,000 square foot laboratory building that is 96% all electric. They have related to me that the only reason they have a gas boiler in that building is for those vanishingly few cold days where the electric heating can't keep up. And they're using geothermal wells, they're plastering the roof with solar, and that building will be consuming very little fossil fuel. And not far down the street from them in Kendall Square, we just broke ground on the first all-electric biolab building that will be built in Cambridge by Biomet Realty. So again, these things are already possible, and particularly in new construction, there's simply no excuse to allow continued fossil fuel combustion. Almost 10 years ago, I filed a zoning petition in Cambridge with Mike Conley and Dennis Carlone and John Pitkin to require all new construction to be fossil fuel free. That was 2013. And here we are in 2022, and we're still not able to require 100% fossil free construction. That's criminal, especially given what we know about climate change and how much worse it's getting and how quickly it's getting worse. It was 70 degrees in Cambridge just a couple of days ago in November. So we need to act fast. And what I'm working on in Cambridge is a Green New Deal for Cambridge. What the Green New Deal does is, first of all, it requires new construction to account for their embodied emissions. This is an overlooked piece of the puzzle, right? When we build a new building, lots of emissions just in the construction process and the materials. None of that is accounted for anymore. So we are going to require that. Second part is updating our building energy use disclosure ordinance. That ordinance was put in place in 2014. It requires large buildings to report their energy consumption and emissions. What we're now working on is requiring them to reduce those emissions, ultimately to zero. And for commercial buildings, we want them to go to zero by 2035 because time is running out. And then last but not least, it includes the Green Jobs Ordinance because we need to build a workforce to do these retrofits, and we need to do justice by creating economic opportunity, creating jobs for people who are left out of the innovation economy right here in Cambridge. And then the last piece I want to touch on is our community choice aggregation program. This program has been in operation for several years now. Over that time, we've delivered millions of dollars of savings to our electricity ratepayers. We've delivered 100% renewable electricity to those who choose to opt up. And even at 100% renewable electricity is now cheaper than what Eversource is providing in our community choice aggregation program. In addition to that, we are able to provide community solar for low-income ratepayers at a 25% discount. So again, we can do justice as we do this transition, right? There's no contradiction here. We can provide discounted electricity. We can provide improved indoor air quality. We can provide improved comfort to our residents as we transition. I do want to quickly touch on the grid because people bring that up all the time. We can't wait, and we're not going to wait for grid improvements. We have an ongoing project right now by Eversource to install a whole new transfer station in Kendall Square because 40 years of development in Kendall Square has increased the demand for electricity in Cambridge. As soon as the demand goes up, the utilities will provide the electricity because that is their job. And it is the job of the legislature to make sure that that electricity will, as quickly as possible, be 100% renewable. So while it is absolutely true that the grid needs to be upgraded, that's not a roadblock. It's not even a pothole. It just needs to happen, and we need to require 100% fossil fuel-free buildings, new construction in Massachusetts. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your advocacy. We're going to get this done.
Thank you so much, Councillor, for your leadership and for your continued work in your city. We so appreciate having you here. I next want to turn it over to Ellen Watts. Ellen, among her many positions, is the principal and co-founder of Architerra Inc. And we're so happy to have you, Ellen.
Thanks so much, Logan, and thanks, Quentin, and all of you. I count you among my friends and colleagues, and I'm so glad to see the terrific turnout today. I'm Ellen Watts. I'm an architect and advocate. Professionally, I'm known for designing quite a number of net zero buildings, mostly commercial and institutional at quite a large size. I have served on the Boston Society for Architecture board and currently the elected BSA rep to AIA Massachusetts. I formerly co-chaired the Massachusetts Governor's Net Zero Buildings Task Force and was also the elected president of New England Women in Real Estate, now known as Crew Boston. So I have cross-training in government, architecture, real estate. I know a lot about construction budgets and development as a business. Locally, I just want you to know, I've lived in Massachusetts for almost 50 years. I lived in the city of Boston for about 2 decades, and for the last almost 3 decades, I've lived in the town of Wellesley, where I've been involved in inventorying the greenhouse gas emissions and setting the first reduction goals back now almost 15 years ago. So I've been at this for a while. I want to talk about 3 things. One, the context. I want to get way back from Massachusetts and look at what's happening in the world at large. Secondly, some key concepts, including the net zero definition, which has troubled many of us. And lastly, talk about some implementation issues. Miranda, am I able to share my screen, do you think? Can I share screen?
Yes, you can.
All right, let's see if I can do this. Here we go. Let me see if I can get this. Can you all see my screen?
Yep, we can. Thanks, Ellen.
Okay. The Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, as you all know, every 8 years, it issues a report, every 8 years, since 1990. Earlier this year, their most recent assessment came out, the 6th assessment. I was asked to summarize this for the Boston Society for Architecture. It was horrifying for me to read this. And I just want to give a sense of why it's so troubling. It said, and this was written by 270 researchers, approved by 195 governments, and it was very, very different in tone than the 2014 report. It said the climate hazards have significantly increased in this past decade. If warming does not slow down, the dangers are going to multiply exponentially. Societies have not done enough to adapt and stay safe. And as warming continues, the impacts are going to become harder and harder to cope. And the challenge is far greater for poor countries than for rich countries. And to illustrate this point, we are just 3 years beyond the most damaging Atlantic hurricane to ever occur. This was Dorian. It had sustained winds of 180 miles an hour with gusts that were off the charts above 220 miles per hour, which is the highest reported possibility. Even more concerning, this storm brought with it 30 inches of rainfall and a storm surge over 20 feet. That's the height of a 2-story building to parts of the coasts of different countries, including the US, that lie very close to sea level. The destruction was on a par with the most damaging hurricanes and tropical storms anywhere in the world to date. So Massachusetts has already taken the bull by the horns, but big picture, we're part of the world at large. And this report, summed up by the New York Times, said very bluntly, if we do not take advantage of this very brief and rapidly closing window, the opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all is at risk. And the reason why I feel so glad to live in Massachusetts is we are looked to as a leader. When we established the stretch code back in 2008 and 9, and communities started adopting it in 2010, that stretch code became the basis for the subsequent iteration of the model national code. So where Massachusetts goes, the model national codes tend to follow. So we're lucky to have had the Global Warming Solutions Act, which very clearly sets out what are the reductions we need to attain by each and every decade to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And almost all of us live in cities and towns that have similar goals. Some of the baselines are a little different. The community where I live, we only had a greenhouse gas inventory done in 2007. So our baseline is not 1990 as the state is, but it's 2007. Some communities have even more aggressive goals. Point is that whether bound by statewide goals and or local municipal goals, we have laws that require us to achieve these emissions. Now, just now stepping into Massachusetts, what's the challenge? What's the big challenge? You're looking at what I call a pictogram. I made this by looking at Massachusetts DEP data. The red dot on the left says we are here. That those are the total building sector emissions in the year 2022. And over on the right, you see another red dot that says we have 8 years to get here. 8 years to not only mitigate emissions from the projected growth, which is shown above the green line, projected growth including source fuel for heating and embodied carbon associated with that new development, but we have to deep energy retrofit on the order of 75,000 buildings a year. How many buildings are we deep energy retrofitting today? About 300. So we have a huge, huge gap I want to tell you one more thing that's really putting this in context.
And Ellen, just as an FYI, you have about a minute left. I'm so sorry.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
But we have only 8 years to reduce by 25% what has taken us 30 years to reduce so far. So no surprise, in my town and almost every city and town in Massachusetts, the majority of emissions come from buildings, and the majority of emissions come from gas associated from heating those buildings. It's not a new idea. It's been around since 2009 to have a building code that targets net zero. Communities far and wide, representing 90% of the population, have adopted this stretch code, but it's become very, very flabby. So what we're presented with now is, if you're automatically updated, you're going to get one set of provisions, but you can enhance those provisions through a municipal vote. I'm really hoping to emphasize that whether you opt in or not, these codes do address existing buildings with respect to additions greater than 1,000 square feet, with respect to level 3 alterations greater than 50% of the inhabited area, or any change in use. So that is a huge plus and a reason to be very, very happy. This is a quick chart showing what Logan said, which is the differences are few, shown in red for both residential and commercial, but the differences have very great impact. They set us on our way. Even without these regulations, we all know the wonderful work by Built Environment Plus has shown us that are already 13 million or thereabouts square feet in Massachusetts, with nearly 17 million net zero or net zero ready in the pipeline. So we can do this. What would I want for the next governor to do? These are my final remarks. I think the next governor should allow, Governor Keeley should allow any and all home rule communities of any number to adopt the opt-in specialized code and nix the fossil fuel pathways, the mixed fuel pathways. The reason I say this is codes are always constructed with alternative compliance pathways, and the codes are always making obsolete some of those pathways. It's a natural progression. So allowing communities, not as part of a pilot project and not without all of the other good things baked into the net zero code, to ban gas, this would be a way to reinforce the importance of statewide regulation while just simply nixing those pathways. To address embodied carbon, I would say that's almost as big a miss as the kind of monkeying around with the definitions. Next, regulate refrigerants. I think something that angles towards net zero buildings with heat pumps, ground source or air source, without regulating refrigerants is a mistake. And last two would be, obviously, we need incentives, just like green communities were spurred by incentives, and we need a workforce training program on an unprecedented scale. The buildings that have existed today have spawned 300 construction companies and installers that are very experienced, but we need about 10 times that. Thank you for listening to these thoughts.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for your incredible expertise and your advocacy. We so appreciate it. We're running a little behind schedule, so if folks will be able to stick within the 3 to 5 minutes, that would be wonderful. But so grateful to have you here, and I want to pass it over to our next speaker, Dr. Adrian Allen, who's a physician at Massachusetts General Hospital. So take it away, Adrian.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Adrian Allen. I work at Mass General Brigham, and I work in primary care and quality, safety, and sustainability. I'm also a member of the Belmont Board of Health, but speaking today on my own capacity for a fossil fuel-free stretch code, really speaking on the health aspects. You've heard already about the dangers of climate change, and climate change is the greatest health risk we have right now, which will really affect all of our lives. But immediately, I want to speak about air pollution. Stopping fossil fuels will improve health outcomes immediately. Air pollution kills 1 in 5 people in the world, and kids who grew up in homes where there is natural gas are 42% more likely to have asthma. Now, natural gas use has increased 400% since the 1950s, so there's really no need to have this in the stretch code. And particularly now with fracked gas, there are new health risks. Fracked gas contains other chemicals, including lead, chromium, benzene, hexene, formaldehyde, toluene, xylene. All of these chemicals have other associated risks beyond the burning, besides asthma and heart disease, which come with general fossil fuel burning. So we can have an immediate improvement of health for the population in Massachusetts if we stop burning fossil fuels now. So I'm here to advocate for the health aspects of removing the fossil fuel clause in the stretch code. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk more about it, and to partner with you all to having a better health outcome for our state. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for raising the critical issue of health. I want to pass it now to Joe Curtatone, who is the president of the Northeast Clean Energy Council, also known as NECEC. Take it away.
Thanks, Logan, and to Mass Climate Action Network and all the allies and stakeholders, not only in this call, but doing the work every day in pursuit of climate action. I'm Joe Curtatone, formerly the mayor of Somerville for 18 years, and I'm now entering my 11th month as president of the Northeast Clean Energy Council. We are a trade organization in the Northeast, including all of New England, New York State, and Eastern Canada, and a critical thread between innovation, investment, policy at the national, state, and now the local level, connected to advocacy and research in an effort to lead the just, equitable, rapid transition to a clean energy future, making the clean energy choice the easy choice for all in a diverse climate economy. I came to this work because, as has been alluded to in all the comments so far, the intersectionality of climate action to everything in our lives that is crucial: the fight for racial and social justice, health equity, transit equity, housing equity. It is something that runs through it. And in this moment, never in our society have we seen such an important cause, a threat like the climate crisis, but climate action inextricably tied to business development, economic opportunity, and social impact if we dare to take it. As we all know, the UN's panel on climate change has been emphatic about the planetary peril we face, and we are out of runway on taking our time and making minor adjustments. The actions will be the most impactful at the local level around areas such as buildings and transportation. We're our greatest emitters of greenhouse gases. And here in Massachusetts, we need a stretch code that meets the moment, and we need the next wave of buildings we construct not to need retrofitting 10 or 20 years down the line. And we need to understand how that aligns with the housing emergency that we've been facing for the past decade plus. We need more than 400,000 units of new housing in the Metro Boston area, not just Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, Chelsea, but all of the 101 cities and towns to meet the population growth and the economic growth we've been fighting for. And those units need to meet our climate action goals. And we as policymakers at the local, state, or federal level, we set the marketplace. People will use the words, we need to incentivize investment. Well, the federal government just passed the Inflation Reduction Act. That is a huge bet investment on a climate economy and a clean energy future. I don't know what greater incentive we need. At the Northeast Clean Energy Council, our membership is 300 plus, from an individual with a non-revenue generating startup to an established corporation. And those companies and corporations represent vertical construction, infrastructure, real estate developers, and investment, because they understand and are aligned to the need to achieve net zero. And they want to take leadership on these issues, and they see the economic opportunity. With a stretch code that meets the moment, we will set the marketplace. We will also help us achieve the type of housing equity and genuine and authentic opportunities to rent or buy a home and achieve our public health goals for all. If we don't, we'll continue to see a continued compounded and exacerbation of speculation investment of people who see housing as a commodity and not as a human right. And what we're seeing at the local levels, and I can tell you this as a former mayor and chair of the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition for more than a decade, that cities and towns are looking for leadership from the state on these issues. And this cannot be a town by town basis. I believe in the concept of home rule, but it is a bit of a myth in Massachusetts. We've seen that when you have 351 cities and towns, whether we're facing a pandemic, doing their own thing, or that it doesn't work. And we've seen the failures of our transportation system or our current housing emergency that's only got worse because we don't have the uniform and formal framework of regional governance and rules. We have rules without order, which has caused chaos. So to meet our climate goals, to achieve public health equity, to again, build a type of housing that improves one's quality of life, we need a uniform stretch code that applies to all. We can't have 351 cities and towns doing their own thing. This means we need leadership. And I'd like to see that for the next administration. I believe we have an incoming administration that has that value lens. And this is crucial because we know building emissions, mostly from heating and cooling, amount for 23% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the Northeast alone. That's second only to the transportation sector. So we can do this. We can meet that moment. We can create a code that drives the marketplace, that drives that retrofitting, that builds the type of housing that creates healthy, happy, productive communities, helps us meet our climate action goals. We need the state to move quickly because the worst case scenario of tomorrow, how bad it gets depends on what we do and don't do now. This is a critical component for helping us achieve those goals. Thank you for the opportunity to make some comments, and I thank everyone for their leadership.
Thank you so much, Joe, for your continued leadership and for your participation today. We so appreciate it and are so grateful. So I've been seeing some questions in the chat. I've been seeing some movement. I want to just quickly turn everyone's attention to the toolkit that Miranda has been sending out. And I really want to encourage folks to just take 30 seconds to look through it, identify a particular tweet or a comment that you want to make. And as we're on this call, as we're all listening in, make sure that our voice is heard beyond this hearing. Make sure that it's heard beyond this room, and specifically be sure to tag Governor-elect Healy so that she knows that this is a priority for us, and this is something we're excited for her to take on as she takes office. So take a few minutes to do that. And while we do, I'm going to go ahead and move forward so that we can get to the many wonderful speakers here today. But I want to move forward by introducing our next speaker, Councillor Edel Hygei from the Worcester City Council. And I hope I pronounced that right, Edel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Logan, MCAN, Sierra Club, and all of you and all the partners that organized today's People's Hearing. My name is Edel Hygei. I am a Worcester City Councilor. I'm a volunteer with the local chapter of Mothers Out Front. But most importantly, I am a mom of 2 young boys for whom the future isn't looking so great. I want to have a livable future for them, their friends, every child and resident in Worcester. As many other speakers before me mentioned, especially in gateway communities, Worcester residents are squeezed really tight at the intersection of high housing costs, utility costs, and stagnant wages. Many of our residents are trapped in sweltering 3-deckers during heat waves with uninsulated or under-insulated apartments during cold winters. In the last few weeks, since National Grid and Eversource announced their ridiculous cost increases, our fuel system program in Worcester has seen an increase of 132% in new applications. So quantifiably, that's 10,000 new clients and existing applications as compared to 13,000 clients previously in previous years that we would see between November and April. So that's only in a few weeks. We've seen an increasing amount of people needing support. Worcester's Black and Brown children, as a doctor mentioned previously, continue to be hospitalized at higher rates due to pediatric asthma. Their families tend to live in poorly insulated substandard homes where mold and old carpeting exacerbate their asthma problems. So how does this all connect to the benefits of having a true net zero stretch code and building decarbonization? Well, people like me, organizers on the ground, we look to the state to give municipalities and elected officials, organizers, and residents the most aggressive tools we can have to protect our residents' health, especially those most vulnerable to health disparities, by reducing emissions in large commercial and residential buildings. It gives us the ability to expand access to affordable, safe, healthy homes and decarbonize buildings. We already have made some progress in Worcester with construction of new net zero school buildings and the Worcester Community Choice Electricity Aggregation Program. However, this isn't moving at the aggressive pace that we need to curb our emissions. For example, our 2019 green housing emissions inventory, thank you to the wonderful people leading the Green Worcester plan in our city departments, shows that 26% of green housing emissions in Worcester come from residential buildings. Another 39% come from commercial buildings. That's not even counting emissions from the transportation sector. Just as a reminder, Worcester is an environmental justice community and a community that is also home to many climate refugees that are being displaced from other countries. As Worcester is preparing to adopt what the housing advocates on the ground have been wanting to do for such a long time, inclusionary zoning ordinance that will give us a few more affordable housing units in new construction, we absolutely need an aggressive and true stretch code to remove any pathways to fossil fuel use. As Worcester is seeing over 5,000 new housing units being built in the last year, additional commercial developments, we simply cannot afford to have 5,000 plus buildings aggravate our kids' health, add to the pollution from over 800 active gas leaks, and bury our residents in high utility costs. What we need instead and deserve is clean air, an aggressive path towards eliminating fossil fuels, and creating opportunities for our residents to have good family sustaining jobs. And so my ask as a relatively new elected official in Worcester, as a mother and as a climate activist, is to urge Governor-elect Healy and her administration, as well as all legislatures, to amend the stretch code to eliminate the fossil fuel pathway, to allow us to fully decarbonize our buildings and give gateway communities like Worcester the opportunity to continue building a resilient and thriving city. Our kids deserve it. Our new Green Worcester plan calls for it. And most importantly, it is the right thing to do for a livable future for all of us and all of our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and for all the work you're doing on the ground in Worcester. It is truly inspiring. Speaking of housing, I do want to turn to our next speaker, who is Emily Jones. Emily is the Senior Program Manager at the Local Initiative Supporting Corporations, or Support Corporations, excuse me, or LISC for short. So take it away, Emily.
Thank you, Logan, and thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Emily Jones, and I'm with LISC Boston, where I lead our Green Homes Initiative, which supports affordable housing stakeholders across Massachusetts in equitable building decarbonization efforts. LISC is very supportive of an all-electric opt-in stretch code to help us where we need to go faster. At the same time, we're cognizant of the significant investments that will be needed to transform affordable housing and other priority communities into the post-carbon future. As such, we're pushing for at least $300 million from the Massachusetts State Legislature in the upcoming session for a zero carbon renovation fund that would be administered by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and it would jumpstart the market for zero carbon renovations and scaling deep energy retrofits in existing buildings in Massachusetts. So far, 145 organizations and coalitions have signed on to the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund Coalition, many of whom are here today, representing over 63,000 units of affordable housing and working at the intersection of housing justice, education, climate, and environmental justice. We welcome you to join us by reaching out to myself or the MCAN team. So we urge our next governor and the state legislature to take meaningful steps to implement an all-electric opt-in stretch code and to provide adequate funding and protections for an equitable transition that will truly help us lower energy bills, improve health, combat the climate crisis, and create good paying jobs in the meanwhile. Thank you to all the advocates and participants here today for your work on making this brighter future a reality.
Thank you so much, Emily, for raising that critical initiative. And it's important to recognize the intersectionality of these efforts and the need to keep it intersectional. So I so appreciate that. I want to now pass it to our next speaker, Cornelia Wu, who is the Building Policy Manager at the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, or NEEP for short. So take it away, Cornelia.
Thank you, Logan. As he mentioned, I'm Cornelia Wu. NEEP is a Massachusetts-based nonprofit accelerating energy efficiency in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. We facilitate the Massachusetts Net Zero Buildings Coalition and its technical subcommittee. As we know, buildings make up 40% of total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Decarbonization measures in not just new construction, but also substantial renovations, additions, alterations, and change of use offer critical solutions to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. The Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources has done a thorough job of developing not one, but two above base code options, and we ask for continued progress. These options are the stretch code and the specialized opt-in stretch code. 299 Massachusetts cities and towns are currently part of the Green Communities program, and per the requirements of the program have already adopted the current stretch code, which is the IECC 2018. These communities and any new ones to join the program are automatically enrolled in the updated stretch code. I urge all communities that are not part of the program to become a green community and adopt one of the two above base code measures. Furthermore, I urge all existing green communities to adopt the new specialized opt-in stretch code. In NEEP's analysis of the two code options, which we will be publishing shortly, we find that many of the requirements of the specialized opt-in stretch code are the same as in the stretch code, but with some critical key improvements, such as the full electrification in more scenarios, electric readiness, and zero energy options. While these codes are a good start, we need to keep pushing to meet state climate goals. In the next iteration of these codes, I strongly urge full electrification throughout as a requirement. In order to meet these goals, including net zero emissions by 2050, full electrification is critical before the next 3-year review period. In addition, the impact of embodied carbon on climate change is better understood now more than ever. I urge inclusion of embodied carbon in the next code cycle. The Massachusetts Energy Stretch Code and Specialized Opt-in Stretch Code offer solutions that will save money on energy bills, improve indoor air quality, and ease the transition to a clean energy future. Together with a strong focus on improvement to a full electrification requirement as soon as possible, NEEP strongly urges community adoption of the stretch code and particularly the Specialized Opt-in Stretch Code. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Cornelia, for highlighting again the critical need to continue to move forward and to opt into this program while also pushing for better. That's the name of the game, and I so appreciate your participation. I want to go to our next speaker, who is Kyle Murray. Kyle is a senior advocate at the Acadia Center and a wonderful partner of MCAN. So we're so grateful to have you, Kyle.
Thank you, Logan. 1 second. My name is Kyle Murray. I am the Massachusetts Program Director for Acadia Center, a nonprofit research and advocacy organization committed to advancing the clean energy future. I want to be focusing on the code for low-rise residential buildings today. The net zero code for low-rise residential buildings unfortunately still provides multiple pathways by which new residential buildings are permitted to combust fossil fuels. The first of the two pathways allowing fossil fuel combustion requires a building to attain a HERS rating of 42 install rooftop solar where feasible, and pre-wire for the eventual installation of electric appliance. The second of the two pathways requires the building to be built to passive house specifications and be pre-wired for the eventual installation of electric appliances. While these requirements are a step in the right direction, they simply do not go far enough. The Massachusetts 2050 decarbonization roadmap identified building electrification as the most cost-effective path to obtaining levels of building decarbonization that the Commonwealth must achieve on its path to economy-wide decarbonization by 2050. The all options pathway in the Massachusetts roadmap calls for electrification of over 90% of residential space heating and 95% of residential water heating by 2050. All electric requirements in building codes are one of the most cost-effective means of achieving these levels of electrification, as it is widely agreed upon that electrification of new buildings is more cost-effective than all electric retrofits of existing buildings. As the roadmap itself put it, new construction offers the easiest and most economically attractive way to start decarbonizing the building sector and will have lasting impacts. The implementation of a high-performance net zero emissions building energy code will minimize the near-term installation of additional fossil fuel equipment that would require, in the mid or long term, either costly zero carbon fuels, emissions allowances, or early retirement. For every code cycle in which the Commonwealth delays the inevitability of an all-electric new residential construction, it will result in more GHG mitigation slack needing to be picked up somewhere else to stay on track to achieving net zero by 2050. For example, necessitating deeper, more expensive retrofits to existing buildings or conversion of existing buildings to all-electric appliances before their existing fossil fuel appliances reach end of life. Now, while it is commonly asserted that all electric buildings both cost more to construct and cost more to own, DOER's own analysis demonstrates that this is not the case. The cost analysis included in the summary of stretch code study energy efficiency analysis shows that for all four types of low-rise residential building types, choosing all electric both results in construction cost savings for builders and annual cost savings for homeowners when compared to a natural gas home with the same HERS rating. For example, the DOER analysis estimates that an all-electric small single-family home with a HERS 42 rating will cost a builder over $36,000 less to construct than the same building with natural gas appliances. The same all-electric home would cost a homeowner over $1,500 less annually to own than a similar home with natural gas appliances. For a 6-unit multifamily, these figures are $17,967 in savings for developers and $669 for homeowners. Large single-family homes and townhouses may see similar savings. And I must stress that these figures are from before the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which will further drive down these costs and add up in savings for homeowners. This is great news for all residents of Massachusetts, but particularly low-income residents for whom housing affordability is a major concern. If all electric requirements for new homes are one of the most cost-effective routes to decarbonization of the building sector, they drive down cost to developers, drive down cost to homeowners, reduce indoor air pollution, and dramatically reduce GHG emissions compared to natural gas homes. Why is the Commonwealth not providing a route by which municipalities can require new homes to build all electric? Our next administration must address this oversight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for your wonderful comments. I want to turn it finally to Lisa Cunningham, an incredible partner of ours and the co-founder of the ZeroCarbonMA organization. So I will pass it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Thanks, everybody. My name is Lisa Cunningham. I'm an architect and a co-founder of the organization ZeroCarbonMA and one of the co-petitioners of the legislation that we first passed in Brookline back in 2019, prohibiting the installation of new fossil fuel infrastructure in new and major construction. I want to thank the climate leaders who have spoken today for their comments and their hard work in addressing our climate crisis for so many years. Brookline was the first to passed a so-called gas ban outside of California, the first in a cold weather climate and the first to include major renovations and not just new construction. We had a lot of help from several of you here today. When we passed our legislation, our goal was never to just have Brookline move forward with unique abilities. It was to give every community in the Commonwealth and far beyond moving beyond this ability. After we passed this legislation, my colleagues Cora Weisborg, Ann Wright, and I partnered with RMI to form a building electrification accelerator program with 15 towns and cities who are seeking to implement Brookline's bylaw. I see many of you here today. When our bylaw was overruled by the AG in July 2020, we pivoted our legal strategy and filed home rule petitions asking the state legislature for the authority to allow our local prohibitions. 4 towns quickly followed Brookline in 2021. In 2022, Senator Barrett proposed legislation to allow 10 communities to go forward with a fossil fuel-free pilot program. And all of a sudden, we had 10 towns and cities who had filed home rule petitions. Although the governor claimed that this provision gave him agita, the state legislature, led by Senator Barrett's tenacity and vision, overrode 2 vetoes, and the governor signed this provision into law. Shortly after, 4 more cities moved forward with home rule petitions, debunking the false claim that environmental justice communities did not want to afford the same protections for their communities. These cities included Somerville, Boston, representing 10% of the state's population, the gateway city of Salem, and Amherst. But we don't need to have communities waiting in line for a flawed pilot program or jockeying for position for this privilege. And this shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right. We don't need to pilot fossil fuel free construction. DOER already knows, as many have pointed out, that all electric construction is cost effective, practical, less expensive operationally, and has better life cycle costs compared with every single fossil fuel building type. We know that we need to stop the use of fossil fuels immediately, and we know that this is not just a climate imperative. It is a health imperative and an equity imperative, and it is a fiscal imperative. We also know that ripping out systems that are designed to last at least 30 years, well past the point that we must be fossil fuel free, is fiscal folly. As those before me have pointed out, we need to do more than this and build to net zero standards with strict provisions for embodied carbon. But over 3 years later, we are still going in the wrong direction. Our state agencies, including the DOER, DPU, and our state legislature, are still obstructing climate progress, catering to the fossil fuel industry, ignoring the state's own climate plans and mandates, and continuing to prevent communities from reaching not only their own climate goals, but the state and federal goals of reducing our carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. We have a serious misalignment of will and authority and a serious misalignment of policy with our mandated climate goals. So along with my colleagues at ZeroCarbonMA, we call on the state legislature, DOER, DPU, and the new governor to immediately eliminate the fossil fuel pathway from both the specialized and the stretch code. The state also needs to step up with more funding to help communities reach the state's goal of decarbonizing 1 million buildings and 300 to 400 million square feet of commercial space. We have to ensure that our most vulnerable communities are not left behind in our climate transition, and we urge the adoption of the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks to Logan and all the people at MCAN and Sierra Club and other partners for sponsoring this call. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you so much to everyone who gave comments and weighed in on this critical issue. Unfortunately, given time, we're not going to be able to add additional commenters, but we will have some next steps for how folks can make sure that their voice is heard. I'm going to turn it over to Claire Carl to tell you a little bit more about exactly what you can do. But before then, I just want to encourage everyone again to please make sure that you are spreading the word about this work, about the urgency across social media, and be sure to tag our governor-elect. Be sure to tag our leaders in the legislature who have been working on this issue, and be sure to continue to do that, to call attention to this throughout the day. As someone mentioned in the chat, it doesn't need to be all right now. You can post one now and a few later on. So thank you all so much again. And I am going to turn it over to Claire Carl for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Logan. Thank you, everyone. I'm Claire Carl. I am the Movement Building Director with Unitarian Universalist Mass Action, as well as the coordinator for Mass Power Forward, the coalition sponsoring today's event, being spearheaded by MCAN, Sierra Club, 350, other amazing groups. And this was such an incredible hearing, such an incredible people's hearing. And so I wanted to, as a faith organizer, invite folks to take a moment and take in the abundance of our movement, take in the abundance of the incredible network of people working together. There's so much to be afraid for, to have fear. There's so much facing us. And I know that I can do it so much better when I remember I'm with you, that we're connected. And it feels daunting to think about retrofitting every single building across the state. And yet when I see the abundance of passion, intelligence, spirit on today's call, I'm just like, wow, like we're definitely gonna make it. And so it's not every day that I'm able to tap into that feeling. So I ask that if you can, feel it. That's what's going to sustain us through these really difficult times, this difficult millennia coming at us. And so please continue to take action with that toolkit. We need our new governor to hear us loud, 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 loud and clear. We know time and time again that our legislators take more action when we call on them to, when they feel us right behind them. Yes, keep going. So use that toolkit, make sure that they hear from us, make sure they know. And if you didn't get a chance to comment today, I know most of us didn't, please send in your comments. They are important, they matter, and we need to keep telling them. So thank you. Thank you, Logan. I think that's my closing.
Thank you so much, Carl. And thank you all so much for being a part of this effort. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, and be sure to send comments to Miranda, and we'll save this chat. We'll be sure that the recording is sent out, so no worries there. We'll send it out to everyone who RSVP'd. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.